You are here now, wherever that may be. Lying down, sitting still, maybe the lights are off. Maybe there's only a dim glow around you. Let yourself relax. Breathe slowly. Let the weight of the day melt into the silence between my words. Tonight, I'll tell you a story. A different story. A quiet one. About someone just like you. In a world full of ordinary people, there is one person who is not like the rest. Someone who feels things a little deeper. Who hears the silence behind the noise. Who can move mountains without anyone noticing. That someone is you. But before we begin this journey together, take a moment, just a small one, to join us in the quiet. In the comments below, tell me what time it is where you are. And tell me where you're listening from. Your city, your country, your corner of the world. And if this story finds a home in you, if it helps you breathe easier, or simply keeps you company for a while, then gently press the like button, tap subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a quiet moment too. You're not alone here. Now close your eyes or soften your gaze. Let's begin the story of the only human on Earth with powers no one else has ever known. But first, just breathe. Just breathe. You were 6 years old the first time it happened. It was raining. The kind of soft, misty rain that made the world blur at the edges. You remember standing on the porch, small fingers curled around the wooden rail, watching the water fall like a curtain. The sky had been gray all day. Heavy. Still. And you felt something stir inside you. Not fear, not joy. Something else, something quiet and strange. A kind of knowing that didn't have words yet. You didn't speak. You didn't move. You just wished, with everything inside you, for the rain to stop. And then, it did. Not slowly, not after a while. Instantly, like the sky had been listening, like the clouds had been waiting for your permission. At 6 years old, you didn't tell anyone. How could you? You barely understood it yourself. Maybe it was a coincidence, you told yourself. Maybe it wasn't real. But in the days that followed, the world seemed different. You'd walk into a room, and the lights would flicker just slightly. Not off, not on, just a soft pulse like a heartbeat in the walls. Leaves would swirl around your feet when you were still. Dogs you'd never met would stop barking as soon as you looked at them. Sometimes you heard your name whispered, though no one was there. It was as if the world was alive. Not in a magical fairy tale way, but in a quiet, responsive way, as if it knew you. You kept it to yourself. Even then, you sensed that the world preferred things it could explain, and you were starting to become something it couldn't. Years passed. Slow, quiet years filled with small, strange moments. Nothing big, nothing loud, just unusual patterns. When you were angry, winds picked up. When you laughed, birds gathered nearby. When you were sad, really sad, mirrors fogged without heat. But you never flew. You never threw cars. You never wore a cape. The stories in movies and comics were always dramatic. Explosions, fights, glory. But your life was soft. And the power, if that's what it was, lived in silence. There was a tree behind your childhood home, old, knotted, and patient. You used to sit with your back against its trunk for hours. It felt safe, and sometimes it felt like it breathed with you. One day in autumn, you sat beneath it with your eyes closed. No phone, no books, just the hush of falling leaves. And you had a thought, what if I asked it to bloom again? The thought wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was more like a hope, a pure, quiet wish from deep in your chest. And for a second, just a second, you thought you saw a bud form. Green, delicate, out of season. You never told anyone. You didn't need to. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were simply watching, observing yourself, and slowly coming to terms with the fact that you weren't like the others. But no one noticed. Not your parents, not your teachers, not your friends. To them, you were quiet, maybe a little strange, but mostly invisible. And that's how you liked it. Because hiding meant safety, and being seen meant questions. Questions you couldn't answer. Sometimes, late at night, you'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if there were others like you. You'd whisper into the dark, just softly enough that even the walls wouldn't hear. Am I the only one? The silence always answered. Not with words, but with stillness. And in that stillness, you began to understand something important. Your powers, if that's what they were not given to make you powerful. They were given to make you feel, to notice the world more deeply, to connect with it in ways most people forgot how to do. Not to conquer it, but to belong to it in the quietest, most beautiful way. And so you did. You kept listening. You kept learning. You kept becoming something only you could understand. It started with a whisper, and the world hasn't stopped listening since. You grew older, as all children do. But while others ran forward, loud, bright, reckless, you moved quietly through the edges of life, unseen, unbothered, mostly. There was school, rows of desks, the ticking of clocks, the humming lights above you, the murmur of thoughts that sometimes slipped out of people's heads and into your ears. That's when you realized it wasn't just weather or nature responding to you anymore. Now, people were doing it too, or at least their thoughts were. You'd sit in class pretending to read, and a soft voice would drift in, not spoken, but real. I hope they don't call on me. Please don't notice me. I hate this place. At first, you thought you were imagining it, that your mind was making it up. But the voices matched the faces, the gestures, the subtle twitches of anxiety. You began to hear what others didn't say, and that changed everything. It wasn't like a flood. It wasn't noisy or overwhelming. It was more like whispers carried on wind. You only heard them when the room was still, when someone's emotions were louder than their words. You never told anyone. How could you explain it? You didn't want to be tested. You didn't want to become an experiment. You just wanted to keep being you. So you learned to blend in. You wore the same clothes. You nodded when people spoke. You laughed when it was expected. But all the while, you watched with a quiet curiosity that deepened every year. You started to see the threads that held people together, invisible things, longing, loneliness, fear, the way someone's smile could be full of ache, the way someone's anger could hide a broken heart, and you understood them, even when they didn't understand themselves. There was a moment, maybe you were 14, when you walked past someone crying behind the school building. You didn't know them. They didn't see you. But something tugged at your chest. You stepped closer, not making a sound. You didn't ask what was wrong. You didn't offer help. You just sat nearby, close enough for them to feel not alone. The crying slowed, the silence softened, and after a few minutes, they stood and left. They never saw your face, but you knew, somehow, they had needed you. And for that moment, you had been there. That became your way. You didn't use your powers to impress. You didn't seek attention. You just listened, felt, watched. And when needed, you showed up in the smallest ways. A pencil left on a desk before someone realized they'd forgotten theirs. A door held open at the exact right time. A glance of understanding when someone was silently falling apart. You were invisible, yes, but in your invisibility, you became something else entirely. A quiet guardian, a still presence, an echo of peace in a world too loud to notice it. There were days, of course, when it hurt, when you felt the ache of being different, when you longed to say, I know what you're feeling. I hear you, even when you're silent. But the world isn't built for truths like that, so you kept it tucked inside like a candle shielded from the wind. And in the stillness, your power grew, not in force, but in depth. You began to understand what no one around you seemed to, that real power isn't about what you can do. It's about how deeply you can connect. You could feel the heartbeat of a crowded room. You could sense the moment someone was about to give up. You could walk through a storm and it would move around you, not because you demanded it, but because the storm recognized you. You didn't chase attention. You didn't need approval. But every now and then, when the sky turned dark and the world grew heavy, you'd lie awake and ask the question that still hadn't left you. Am I really alone in this? And the wind outside your window would answer, not in words, but in the way it gently tapped against the glass, like a friend reminding you, no, you're not alone. You are simply not like the rest. You never planned to use your power. Not really. It had always been something that lived quietly inside you, a private hum, like music heard through walls. Not a tool, not a weapon, just a part of you. Until the day you had to choose. It happened in a moment so ordinary, you almost missed it. The world didn't slow down. There was no lightning in the sky, no dramatic music, only a sound, a screech. Then a silence too sharp to be natural. You were walking home, a street you knew well, lined with tired trees and windows that always seemed a little too closed. A gentle breeze, your shoes on the pavement, a regular day. Then that sound, brakes, metal folding in on itself, the crack of something fragile hitting something much harder. Your feet stopped before your mind did. And there, just ahead, a car on the sidewalk, a bicycle bent into impossible angles, and a small body on the ground. Still, no one moved, not yet. Time, for just a heartbeat, held its breath, and you felt something open in you. Not panic, not fear, but something ancient. Like a door long sealed was pushed open without force. You didn't run, you walked. Slowly, calmly. Like your steps were part of the air itself. People started to notice you, only barely. You weren't glowing, you weren't shouting. But something about you made space around the noise, a silence that people didn't understand, but stepped aside for. You knelt beside the child, eyes closed, face pale. The air was thick with worry, with gasps, with too many what ifs and not enough what now. And all you did was place a hand gently near the child's chest, not touching, just close. You didn't speak, you didn't command anything. Inside yourself, you simply reached, not with hands, but with the part of you that always listened. The part that made the rain stop. The part that heard unsaid words. The part that remembered the tree blooming in autumn. And from that place, you whispered, not aloud, but deep within your being, stay, nothing more. A single, still thought, offered, not forced. And then, a breath, shallow, real, alive. You opened your eyes. The child was breathing, faint, but steady. Someone screamed for help, someone else called an ambulance, and you stood, quietly, without fanfare, and disappeared into the crowd. You didn't wait to be thanked. You didn't need to be noticed. You just walked, like a shadow slipping back into light. That night, you sat on your bed, barefoot, staring out the window. You had crossed a line. You had chosen to use it, not in a dream, not by accident, but on purpose. And it changed something in you, not because it made you feel powerful, but because it made you feel responsible. You hadn't saved the world. You had helped one life breathe again. And maybe that was enough. But now you knew the truth. This thing inside you, this quiet, invisible force, was not meant to stay hidden forever. You were meant to be there when the silence was needed most. You could no longer pretend you were just like the others, because others don't bring people back with a thought. Others don't make the wind pause when someone needs time. Still, you weren't ready to tell anyone. The world wasn't ready either. It might never be. But you were ready to watch more carefully, to step closer to the line when no one else would. You didn't become a hero that day. There were no headlines, no applause, no costume, just a quiet moment in which you said yes to something larger than yourself. And the world softly said yes back. You moved to the city in your early 20s, not because you wanted noise, you never did, but because it's easier to disappear in a crowd. The city was a machine of motion, lights that never dimmed, people who never paused, everyone moving forward, always forward, as if stopping meant being seen, and being seen meant being judged. You rented a small apartment above a florist shop. The walls were thin, the windows old, but it was quiet enough at night to think, to breathe. You liked that. During the day, you walked, miles and miles, nowhere urgent to be, through neighborhoods full of strangers, past windows filled with lives that didn't know yours existed, and no one ever stopped you. Not once. It was comforting and aching. Because while the world rushed by, while thousands of voices rose and fell each day, you remained separate, connected to everything, yet held apart. You were like them, and no one knew. At a cafe, you'd sit near the window and listen, not to the noise, not really. You listened to the emotions beneath the surface, the barista hiding a tremble in her fingers, the man with the briefcase repeating the same line in his head. You're fine, you're fine, you're fine. You heard the truth between sentences. You felt the unspoken in the room like humidity before a storm, and still you said nothing. What would you even say? Hello, I can feel your sadness. Would you like to talk about it? No. You stayed quiet, always. You knew what would happen if you spoke too much, if you revealed too much. Fear, curiosity, demand. They'd want to study you, to name you, to use you. So instead, you walk through the world like a ghost with warm hands, able to touch, but never truly be touched. The loneliest part of your life wasn't being unseen. It was being impossible. Not misunderstood. Just never truly understood at all. And yet you were never bitter, not even once, because while you moved through this world like mist, you still saw beauty. Tiny, aching beauty that no one else seemed to notice. The way sunlight hit the top of a fire escape. The pattern of footsteps echoing in an empty subway tunnel. The small gasp of joy when a child dropped a coin and it landed upright. These moments kept you anchored. They reminded you that life, even loud, messy, impatient life, was still good, still worth walking among, even if you walked alone. And so you gave little pieces of yourself away, quietly. A door held longer than needed, an umbrella left accidentally for the woman without one, a glance that said, I see you, even if no one ever said it back. It was a strange kind of existence, a dance where you never touched the floor, but made everyone else's steps smoother. You became a silent participant in thousands of lives, never a lead character, but always present, always watching, always ready. Sometimes you stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by people rushing past you, and you asked the question you had asked since childhood, is anyone else like me? And again, no answer came, but something changed. Not in the world, in you. The loneliness began to reshape itself. It stopped feeling like isolation and started feeling like space. Space to see, space to feel, space to choose. You weren't apart from the world. You were around it, holding it gently, even if no one could see your hands. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough. You had no one to tell your secrets to, no one who could truly understand the weight you carried, the restraint, the patience. But you did have the night, and the wind, and the lights of windows that glowed in soft yellow hues, like whispers saying, we're here too. You're not the only one awake. And there was the city, huge, unfeeling, alive. It never asked questions, it never judged your silence. It let you walk its bones freely. You started to love it, not because it was kind, but because it gave you room to be, room to walk without explanation, room to feel things no one else felt, room to imagine a world where people didn't have to be loud to be strong. And one day, as you sat alone on a park bench, watching the pigeons argue over crumbs, You realized something. You weren't hiding anymore. You were waiting for what you didn't yet know. But the waiting no longer felt empty. It felt right, because you could feel something coming. A shift, a ripple in the quiet, something or someone that would reach across the stillness and see you, not for your gifts, not for your silence, but for the person beneath it all. And when that moment came, you promised yourself you would not run. You would not disappear. You would stay. You would be seen. And maybe, just maybe, you would no longer be alone. It began with a mistake. Or maybe something more subtle than a mistake. A pause in the pattern. A soft crack in the rhythm of your day. You had taken the wrong turn. It wasn't dramatic. No lost roads, no sudden fog, no fate announcing itself in neon. You simply followed a different sidewalk out of the train station, your thoughts quiet, your heart half asleep. Normally, you would have noticed. You were always aware of your route, of the people around you, of the breath of the city. But this time, you were somewhere else in your mind, thinking about nothing and everything, about all the lives you had touched without knowing their names, about the silence you carried like a second skin. And so your feet wandered, and you found yourself in a part of the city you didn't recognize. It was quieter here. The buildings were older, their bricks soft with time. Vines curled along the iron gates. The windows were wide open, breathing in the breeze like old lungs. And on the corner, there was a bookstore. You didn't mean to stop, but something in the way the light fell through the dusty glass, something in the uneven lettering on the chalkboard sign, held you there. A whisper again, not from outside, but from within. Go in. So you did. The bell above the door was cracked and sweet. The scent hit you first. Old paper, worn leather, and something floral, something soft. The space was small, lined wall to wall with books that didn't match. Some were stacked sideways, some curled open like fallen petals. And behind the counter stood someone. At first, you barely noticed them. You were still adjusting to the quiet, still letting your eyes catch up to what your heart already felt. They were reading, elbows on the desk, head tilted, lost in the kind of concentration that made the world shrink. Their presence didn't demand attention. It invited it. Like a window cracked open on a warm day. You thought you would simply look around and leave. That's what you always did. You didn't stay places. You didn't meet people. But they looked up, and that changed everything. It wasn't just that they saw you. It was how they saw you. There was no surprise, no startled blink of a stranger, only stillness. Recognition, not as if they knew your face, but as if they had been waiting to see something, and whatever it was, you carried it. They smiled, not wide, not performative, just enough to make you stay. Looking for something? They asked, voice calm. You wanted to lie, say no, say you were just passing through. But the truth slipped out like a sigh. I'm not sure yet. Their smile deepened. That's the best kind of search. You wandered through the shelves. Your fingers grazed the spines like reading Braille. History, fiction, poetry, folklore. The smell of time was everywhere, and every now and then you looked toward the counter. They were watching you, but not in the way most people watched. There was no expectation in their eyes, only curiosity, soft and patient, like they were watching a bird land nearby and didn't want to startle it. You stayed longer than you meant to, and when you left, you hadn't bought a book, you hadn't even opened one, but they said, come back anytime. And for the first time in a long time, you did. The visits became habit. Not every day, not even regularly, but you returned. And they always remembered. Your name came up only after a few weeks, so did theirs, and it fit them perfectly. Warm, simple, grounded. You spoke little at first, but over time, the silences became shorter and the spaces between words grew filled with comfort, not excitement. Not romantic flutters, just something honest, something peaceful. They never asked too much, never prodded, never treated you like a puzzle. And yet, you felt the edges of yourself becoming clearer around them. You weren't hiding. You weren't performing. You were being. One afternoon, it rained. The heavy, thoughtful kind of rain that makes the whole city lean in. You had stopped by again. No umbrella, no plan. They offered tea. You said yes. You sat together in the little reading nook by the window, watching the world blur beyond the glass. And they said something small. Sometimes I feel like people aren't real, like they're moving through life on automatic, but when I talk to you, I feel awake. You didn't respond right away. You weren't used to being seen. Not like this. But you nodded and whispered, I feel that too. It wasn't a confession, it wasn't a declaration, but something shifted in the air, something unspoken but unmistakable. They leaned their head back, their eyes closed, and for a while, you both just listened to the rain. You didn't have to explain the way you felt things, deep, wide, endlessly. You didn't have to justify your quiet. They made space for it, and in that space, your heart began to unfold, not in fireworks, not in explosions, but like a hand slowly opening after years of being clenched. You didn't tell them about your power, not yet, but you didn't feel the need to hide it either, not in your posture, not in your presence, and that was new. One evening, long after sunset, as the shop was closing, they stood beside you at the door and said, you feel different, like you see things the rest of us miss. You looked at them, really looked, not just with your eyes, with every part of you, and for a moment you considered it, the truth, the full, strange truth. But instead you said gently, I try to listen more than I speak. They nodded slowly, as if they already knew, and then they said something that stayed with you. You don't have to say everything, but if you ever want to be known, I'm here. It wasn't a demand, it wasn't a promise, just an invitation. And for the first time in your life, someone had left a door open without asking what you were hiding behind it. That night, as you walked home, you felt something you hadn't felt in years. Not power, not purpose, belonging. A single person who didn't ask for more than you were willing to give. A single place where your silence wasn't strange. It was respected. Maybe even cherished. And in that quiet certainty, you knew you weren't entirely alone anymore. Not in the way that once haunted you. Not in the way that turned your soul inward like a folded page. Now, there was another. Someone who saw the shape of your outline and didn't flinch. Someone who might one day see all of you and stay. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. You had always been so careful, moving through life like wind through trees, touching everything but never leaving marks. You kept your steps soft, your choices quieter than your thoughts. You practiced restraint not as a rule, but as a rhythm. It was how you stayed safe, invisible, whole. But sometimes, the world pulls you into its storm, whether you're ready or not. It began with another ordinary moment, a Tuesday, overcast sky. The kind of weather that made the city speak more softly, traffic quieter, people more contemplative. You had been walking, as you often did, through the same streets, past the same doors, your mind drifting in gentle spirals. You were not thinking of your abilities, not trying to sense anything, just existing. And then came the sound, the kind that cuts through all others. A child's scream, not tantrum, not frustration, fear, real fear, raw and unfiltered. You turned without thinking, your body already in motion before your thoughts could catch up. Across the street, a runaway truck, brakes locked, horn blaring, metal, wild and unstoppable. In its path, a woman frozen in place, arms spread in instinct, shielding the child behind her. Time bent, slowed, collapsed. Your heartbeat was steady, your breath silent. The world faded, and the power inside you, the one you had always tried to keep beneath the surface, rose up without asking. You didn't speak, you didn't raise a hand, you just felt the weight of motion, felt the air thickening around the vehicle, felt the split-second window where everything could still change. And you stepped forward, just a step, not heroic, not grand, but decisive. The truck veered, violently, impossibly, as if shoved by a wall of air. It swerved away. Metal scraped metal, rubber screamed against pavement, and then silence. No one was heard. People shouted, someone cried, phones rose like insects sensing blood. You stood there, still, breathing slowly, and then you realized someone had filmed it. You went home in a fog, not panic, not fear exactly, but something colder, the knowing that your quiet life had just been split open. You had saved them, but not invisibly, not in secret. The footage spread, first on a local forum, then a city blog, then everywhere. It was grainy, shaky, but clear enough. They replayed it in slow motion, again and again and again. People debated, argued, searched, theories multiplied. Wind currents, street vibrations, coincidence. But none of them satisfied the watchers, because what they saw was you, still, focused, present, too calm, too certain, too something. You didn't have a mask, you didn't fly, you didn't fit the image the world had of power. And that made you even more fascinating. Within a day, your name was found, your face matched, your apartment visited. Not by authorities. Not at first. By curiosity. Strangers with phones, bloggers, YouTubers whispering about the calm one, the soft-spoken telekinetic, the urban empath. You didn't answer the door. You didn't open your messages. You disappeared from the street you once knew like breath. But it wasn't enough. The world had seen you. And the world does not forget. You stayed with them. The one from the bookstore. The only person who didn't ask questions when they opened the door and saw your eyes. Not panicked, but exposed. They simply stepped aside and said, "Come in." No lights were turned on. No words were pushed forward too fast. You sat on their floor, legs crossed, fingers trembling quietly. And they sat with you. You didn't speak for an hour. You didn't need to. Eventually you whispered, "They saw," and they nodded, as if they'd always known it would happen someday. Their hand found yours, not gripping, just resting, like a dock tied loosely to a boat it trusts not to drift away. "You don't owe anyone anything," they said. But you already knew that wasn't true. You owed yourself something, something you had avoided for years. A decision. Not if the world would know you, but how? The interviews flooded in. Some kind, some cruel, some exploitative, hungry for a glimpse beneath your calm exterior. You said nothing, but the silence only made them louder. Documentaries speculated. Commentators screamed. Conspiracy threads lit up like wildfire. Were you government trained, alien, a hoax? You watched from the shadows, not in fear, in sadness. Because what the world wanted was not to know you, it was to claim you, turn you into a banner, a warning, a product. But you remembered something. Your power had never been loud. It had never needed applause. It was not here to save the world. It was here to understand it, to heal it in pieces no one else noticed. And so you made a decision, one no one expected. You walked into the city, broad daylight, no disguise, and you stood in a park, the center of it all. As people gathered, phones raised, breath held. You didn't speak into microphones. You didn't explain anything. You just looked at them, and with eyes full of every silent life you had touched, you spoke one sentence: "I am not here to be understood." Then you walked away, and the world stopped chasing. Because what they really feared was not your power. It was your peace. That night, alone in your borrowed room, you stood by the window. The sky was overcast again, the wind restless, but inside you, a stillness. You hadn't lost yourself. You had revealed only enough to reclaim the rest. and maybe the world would never fully understand you. But that was no longer your burden. You had stepped into the light, not to please them, but to honor the truth you had lived for so long. That power is not about spectacle. It is about presence. It is about holding a hand through grief, about pausing the world for one fragile breath, about staying when no one else does. You were not the hero they imagined, but you were real. And that, in a world so starved for honesty, was enough. It would have been so easy to leave, to vanish into the background of another city, to let the story fade as all stories eventually do. You had thought about it. That quiet escape, starting over where no one recognized your face or whispered your name in curiosity or fear. But you stayed, not out of obligation, not to prove anything, but because the world was still full of quiet things worth protecting. And you had learned how to listen for them. You stopped answering the calls. You turned down interviews, ignored invitations. The world, at first, insisted, then begged, then grew bored. And slowly, you became background again. Not forgotten. No, never that. But softened into a myth. The one who stopped the truck. The one who moved the wind. The calm one. The stories varied. Some believed you were fake. Some believed you were divine. You let them believe. Because you had nothing left to explain. You returned to your apartment above the florist. The walls were still thin. The windows still breathed at night. You dusted the shelves, watered the plants that had waited too long, and watched the city lights blink like slow heartbeats in the distance. At night, the wind still came to your window, familiar, gentle, as if it remembered everything you'd ever asked of it. You no longer reached for it, but you welcomed it, like an old friend who didn't need conversation. You resumed your walks, your favorite cafe, your bookstore. They were still there, still reading, still watching. When you entered, they smiled, not with surprise, but with understanding. You sat across from them. No words, only silence. And that silence said, "You're still you, and I'm still here." People still came from time to time, not in crowds, not the loud ones, but the quiet ones, the ones who didn't want to expose you, only to understand themselves. You saw them, a teenager with a notebook too full of thoughts, a woman who always looked over her shoulder, a man who walked like the air weighed too much on his shoulders. They found you in parks, on trains, at bus stops, and sometimes, without knowing why, they sat near you. And they breathed. That was enough. You never needed to reveal anything. You just needed to be there, like still water in a restless stream. A mirror. A pause. A proof that peace was possible, and that being different didn't mean being alone. One day, while walking past the same old tree in the park, you stopped beneath its branches. It had changed, older now, heavier, but still strong. You placed your hand on the bark just for a moment. You didn't ask anything of it, didn't wish. But as your palm rested there, a soft wind passed through the leaves, and for a moment, just a moment, a single bud bloomed, out of season, out of expectation, out of love. And you smiled, because now you understood. It had never been about power, not about control, not about being more than human. It was about being fully human, about knowing how to feel so deeply that the world couldn't help but respond. They asked you once, years later, when the noise had all died down, if you could go back, would you choose this life again? You looked at them, the one person who had always seen you clearly, and you said, "I never chose this, but I chose what I became because of it. And yes, I'd choose that again." They didn't say anything for a while. They simply reached out, a gesture not of affection, but of recognition. You took their hand, and in that touch was everything neither of you had ever needed to say. Now, when the world looks for you, and it still does sometimes, they find only traces. A person remembered for kindness, for calm, for walking gently in a world that never asked them to. A myth, maybe, a mystery, but not a warning, not a weapon, a presence. You are not famous, not anymore. You are not rich, not powerful in the way stories want you to be. But you are whole, and that is enough. You once asked the wind as a child, "Am I alone?" And now you know you never were. The world was always speaking. It just needed someone who knew how to listen. And in the end, that's what your power really was. Not the ability to move things, but the ability to remain still in a world that never stops moving. To carry peace when no one else remembered what it looked like. To stand in the middle of chaos and choose silence, not as retreat, but as strength. And so you live, not hidden, not loud, but clear. You wake each morning with the same breath. You drink your tea. You smile at strangers. You leave behind no footsteps, only soft echoes in the hearts of those who needed you, even if they never knew your name. And when the wind rustles the leaves just right, when the light bends gently around a window frame, when someone feels seen for the very first time, they remember that there was once a quiet one, different, strange, beautiful. The only human with powers not meant to save the world, but to remind it how to feel again.